Parents hung this cute bear cub on the tree. What this human boy did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The forest whispered secrets through rustling leaves as 10-year-old Connor Adams finished his chores at his grandfather's farmhouse. Wiping sweat from his brow, he gazed at the orchard that separated their property from the dense woodland beyond. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across rows of apple trees, their branches heavy with ripening fruit. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of apples through the open kitchen window, beckoning Connor outside. "Can I go explore, Grandpa?" Connor asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. Martin Adams looked up from his newspaper and nodded. "Be back before sunset and stay away from the deep woods," he cautioned, his weathered face creasing with a slight smile. "Your grandmother's making your favorite stew tonight." Connor's heart leaped with excitement. He loved these summer visits to his grandparents' farm in the rural outskirts of Pine Hollow. The city apartment where he lived with his parents felt suffocating compared to the freedom of open fields and mysterious forests. Here, each day brought new adventures and discoveries. He slipped out the back door, pausing to pet their old farm dog, Rusty, who wagged his tail but remained sprawled in the shade, too comfortable to join the boys' expedition. Connor didn't mind. Sometimes solitude made discoveries more magical, like they belonged only to him. As he ventured toward the orchard, Connor noticed Mr. and Mrs. Dawson from the neighboring farm inspecting their trees. The couple had always seemed stern and unfriendly, rarely acknowledging Connor's waves or greetings. Today, they appeared unusually agitated, gesturing wildly and speaking in hushed but angry tones. "Third time this week?" Mr. Dawson's voice carried across the orchard. "We can't afford to lose any more of the harvest." Connor slowed his pace. Curiosity piqued. He ducked behind a thick tree trunk, watching as Mrs. Dawson pointed to several fallen apples, their flesh torn and partially eaten. "It's getting bolder," she hissed, coming all the way into the orchard now. Connor wondered what creature they were discussing. Deer, perhaps, or raccoons. His grandfather often talked about the various animals that visited their property, teaching Connor to appreciate, rather than fear, the wildlife that shared their land. A strange sound broke through his thoughts. A plaintive whimper that didn't belong to any farm animal Connor recognized. It wasn't quite a dog's whine or a cat's meow, but something wilder, more desperate. The sound came again, louder this time, sending a shiver down Connor's spine. The Dawsons had gone quiet too, their heads turning toward the source of the noise. Then Mrs. Dawson gasped, pointing to the edge of the orchard where the trees grew thicker. "There! Nathan, look! It's a bear cub!" Connor's breath caught in his throat. A bear? He'd never seen one outside of the zoo. Carefully, he peered around the tree trunk, eyes widening as a small brown shape emerged from the undergrowth. The bear cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur the color of rich honey, eyes like dark, curious buttons as it sniffed tentatively at fallen fruit. Mr. Dawson's face darkened with anger. That explains the damage. Where there's a cub, the mother can't be far behind. He retreated to their truck parked nearby. Connor watched, mesmerized by the cub's playful movements. It batted at an apple with its paw, then sat back on its haunches to take a bite, looking so much like a stuffed teddy bear that Connor almost laughed. He wanted to move closer for a better look, but his grandfather's warnings about wild animals kept him rooted in place. Mr. Dawson returned from the truck, and Connor's heart stopped when he saw what the man carried: a length of rope and a hunting rifle. The cub, oblivious to the approaching danger, continued to feast on fallen fruit. "Nathan, what are you doing?" Mrs. Dawson asked, her voice low but sharp. "You can't shoot it. People would hear. The ranger station would be all over us." "I'm not going to shoot it," Mr. Dawson replied, though he kept the rifle slung over his shoulder. "I've got a better idea. We'll catch it and hang it up where its mother can see. Scare them both off for good." Connor's stomach twisted with dread. Hang the cub? What did that mean? He wanted to run for his grandfather, but fear kept him frozen, watching as Mr. Dawson fashioned the rope into a crude snare. The bear cub finally sensed danger. It stood on its hind legs, nose twitching, a soft whimper escaping its throat. For a moment, it seemed ready to flee back to the safety of the forest. But Mr. Dawson moved with surprising speed for a man his age. He lunged forward, the snare swinging. The cub's frightened yelp pierced the quiet orchard as the rope caught around its middle. It struggled frantically, paws flailing as Mr. Dawson pulled the rope tight and lifted the small creature off the ground. "Nathan, be careful. What if the mother hears?" Mrs. Dawson glanced nervously toward the forest. "That's the point, Martha. Once she sees her cub like this, she'll know this orchard isn't safe. Bears are smart, they remember." Mr. Dawson dragged the squirming cub toward a sturdy apple tree with a low, thick branch. Connor pressed a hand to his mouth, stifling a cry of protest. The cub's frightened sounds grew more desperate as Mr. Dawson threw the rope over the branch and pulled, hoisting the small creature until it dangled several feet above the ground, spinning and thrashing helplessly. "There," Mr. Dawson said with grim satisfaction. "Let's go back to the house and watch. When the mother comes, she'll see her cub, and they'll both learn to stay away from our orchard." "Shouldn't we call animal control?" Mrs. Dawson asked, though she made no move to free the cub. "And have them lecture us about wildlife protection? No, thank you. This is how my father dealt with pests, and it worked just fine." Mr. Dawson secured the rope to the tree trunk. "Come on, we'll check back in an hour." Connor couldn't breathe as he watched the couple walk away, leaving the terrified cub swinging from the branch. Its cries grew weaker, more pitiful, and tears welled in Connor's eyes. This was wrong, so terribly wrong. The cub wasn't hurting anyone. It was just hungry, looking for food like any other creature. As soon as the Dawsons disappeared from view, Connor emerged from his hiding place. His heart pounded against his ribs as he approached the tree where the cub hung, twisting and squirming. Up close, he could see the fear in its dark eyes, the way its small chest heaved with each panicked breath. "It's okay," Connor whispered, though he knew the animal couldn't understand him. "I'll help you." The cub growled softly, frightened by Connor's approach. He stopped, considering his options. The rope was tied too high for him to reach, and the knot securing it to the trunk looked complicated. He needed something to cut it with, or someone stronger to help. His first thought was to run for his grandfather. But what if the Dawsons returned before they got back? Or worse, what if the mother bear appeared? Connor glanced anxiously toward the forest edge, imagining an angry adult bear charging into the orchard. A rustling sound from the undergrowth made him freeze. The branches at the forest's edge trembled, and Connor's heart nearly stopped. Was this the mother bear coming to find her cub? Should he run, hide? But no massive bear emerged from the trees. Instead, a raccoon scurried across the ground, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the orchard. Connor exhaled shakily, momentarily relieved, then focused again on the desperate cub. He couldn't leave it suffering like this. He had to do something, now. Connor surveyed the area, spotting a fallen branch that looked sturdy enough. An idea formed in his mind, dangerous perhaps, but the cub's increasingly weak struggles compelled him to act. Dragging the branch to the tree, Connor positioned it against the trunk and began to climb. The rough bark scraped his palms, but he ignored the pain, pulling himself higher until he could reach the branch from which the cub dangled. The cub's eyes widened as Connor inched closer along the branch. It renewed its struggles, making the branch bounce alarmingly. "Shh, it's okay," Connor soothed, his voice trembling. "I'm going to get you down." The rope was wound tightly around the cub's middle, and Connor could see it was having trouble breathing. He reached for the knot, fingers shaking. The cub swiped at him with a small paw, its claws narrowly missing Connor's arm. "I know you're scared," Connor murmured, "but I'm trying to help." Carefully, he worked at the knot, loosening it bit by bit. The cub gradually stopped struggling. Whether from exhaustion or a strange understanding that Connor meant no harm, he couldn't tell. Just as the knot began to give way, a shout from across the orchard made Connor's blood run cold. "Hey, what do you think you're doing, boy?" Mr. Dawson's angry voice carried across the orchard. He was striding toward the tree, his face contorted with rage, Mrs. Dawson hurrying behind him. Fear clutched at Connor's throat, but he didn't stop working at the knot. The cub needed him. He couldn't abandon it now. "Get down from there this instant," Mr. Dawson demanded, his voice growing louder as he approached. "That's not your property, and that's not your business." The knot finally came loose in Connor's hands, and the cub dropped a short distance before Connor managed to catch it around its middle. It was heavier than he expected, its fur coarse against his skin. The cub squirmed in his grasp but didn't try to bite or scratch him. "I said, get down." Mr. Dawson stood beneath the tree now, his face red with anger. "And leave that animal where it was." Connor looked down at the man, then at the frightened cub in his arms. He had never deliberately disobeyed an adult before, but this felt different. This was about right and wrong, about protecting a helpless creature from cruelty. "No," Connor said, his voice small but firm. "You're hurting it. That's not right." Mr. Dawson's face darkened further. "Listen here, you insolent brat. That's a wild animal, a pest that's destroying our livelihood. Now put it back, or—" A deep, rumbling growl interrupted his tirade. The sound seemed to vibrate through the very air, raising goosebumps on Connor's arms. Everyone froze. Connor in the tree with the cub, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson below, and even the birds in the orchard fell silent. From the forest edge emerged a massive shape. The mother bear, her fur gleaming copper in the late afternoon sun, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. She rose onto her hind legs, standing over 6 feet tall, and let out another rumbling growl that seemed to shake the ground itself. Mrs. Dawson screamed, clutching her husband's arm. "Nathan, the gun, the gun!" Mr. Dawson reached for the rifle he'd left leaning against a nearby tree, his movements stiff with terror. Connor's own fear was paralyzing, and he hugged the cub closer, unsure what to do. Would the mother bear see him as a threat? Would she attack him for holding her baby? As if in response to his thoughts, the cub let out a soft whimper, squirming in Connor's grasp. The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, her gaze locking with Connor's. In her dark eyes, Connor saw not mindless aggression, but fierce intelligence, and something that looked almost like recognition. "Don't move," Mr. Dawson hissed, raising the rifle to his shoulder with shaking hands. "I'll shoot it if it charges." "No," Connor cried out. "Don't shoot her. She just wants her baby back." The mother bear dropped to all fours again, moving forward with surprising grace for such a large animal. Mrs. Dawson backed away in terror, pulling at her husband's arm, but Mr. Dawson held his ground, the rifle trained on the advancing bear. Connor made a split-second decision. With careful movements, he shifted the cub in his arms and began to descend from the branch, one hand and foot at a time. The cub remained surprisingly calm, as if it understood that Connor was its best chance for reunion with its mother. "Boy, get back up there," Mr. Dawson shouted. "You'll get yourself killed." But Connor continued his descent, his eyes never leaving the mother bear's. When his feet touched the ground, he stood perfectly still, the cub cradled in his arms. The mother bear paused about 20 feet away, her nose twitching as she assessed the situation. "Please don't shoot," Connor said quietly to Mr. Dawson, not turning his head. "I'm going to give her back her baby." "You're insane," Mr. Dawson whispered harshly. "That bear will tear you apart." Connor took a deep breath and slowly, very slowly, knelt down, placing the cub gently on the ground. He kept his movements deliberate and calm, though his heart raced wildly in his chest. The cub stayed where he placed it for a moment, seemingly confused, then took a tentative step toward its mother. The mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound, and the cub's pace quickened, stumbling slightly in its eagerness to reach her. Connor remained kneeling, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. Time seemed to stretch as the cub crossed the space between Connor and its mother. When they finally reunited, the mother bear sniffed her cub thoroughly, making soft noises that sounded almost like concern. The cub pressed against her, secure once more. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the mother bear raised her head and looked directly at Connor. Their eyes met across the orchard, and Connor felt something pass between them, an understanding beyond words. The massive bear dipped her head once, almost like a nod, before turning with her cub and ambling back toward the forest. Only when they disappeared among the trees did Connor release the breath he'd been holding. His legs felt weak as he stood, and he turned to face the Dawsons, expecting another outburst of anger. But Mr. Dawson stood motionless, the rifle now pointed at the ground, his face pale. Mrs. Dawson clutched her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That bear?" Mr. Dawson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It could have killed us all." "She just wanted her baby," Connor replied simply. "She wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Mrs. Dawson looked at Connor with new eyes. "You could have been killed, child. Why would you risk your life for a wild animal?" Connor thought about it for a moment, then answered from his heart. "Because it was scared and hurting, and it couldn't help itself. That's when you're supposed to help the most, isn't it?" A long silence followed his words. Mr. Dawson finally lowered the rifle completely, something like shame crossing his weathered features. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, apparently at a loss for words. The sound of running footsteps broke the tableau. Connor turned to see his grandfather hurrying across the orchard, alerted perhaps by the commotion, or simply checking on Connor as sunset approached. "Connor, what's happening here?" Martin Adams demanded, his eyes darting between his grandson and the Dawsons, noting the rope on the ground and the rifle in Mr. Dawson's hands. Before Connor could explain, Mrs. Dawson spoke up. "Your grandson just taught us something important, Martin," she said quietly. "Something about courage and compassion that we'd forgotten." Mr. Dawson nodded slowly, his earlier anger replaced by a thoughtful expression. "The boy has heart, Martin. More than I've shown today." He looked at Connor directly. "I was wrong about how to handle the bears. I won't be doing that again." As Connor's grandfather looked to him for explanation, the boy felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the cub was safe, lingering fear from the encounter, and something else, something warm that spread through his chest. He had stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and dangerous. He had made a difference. In the distance, just visible at the forest's edge, Connor thought he caught a glimpse of copper-colored fur before it vanished among the trees. The mother bear and her cub were going home, safe and together, just as it should be. And somehow Connor knew that they would be okay now. The orchard might lose a few apples, but something far more valuable had been gained. Understanding, respect, and the knowledge that sometimes the most shocking thing a person can do is show kindness when others choose cruelty. 2 days later, Connor sat on the back porch of his grandparents' farmhouse, legs swinging beneath him as he bit into a fresh apple. The sweet juice trickled down his chin as he gazed out at the orchard, now bathed in early morning light. The encounter with the bears had left him changed somehow, more aware of the delicate balance between humans and the wild creatures that shared their land. "There you are," his grandmother called, stepping onto the porch with a glass of lemonade. "Your grandfather said you've been quiet since the incident with the Dawsons and those bears." Connor accepted the drink with a grateful smile. "I keep thinking about them, Grandma, the mother and her cub. Do you think they're okay?" Eleanor Adams settled into the rocking chair beside him, her kind eyes studying his face. "Animals are resilient, Connor. They've been surviving in these woods long before any of us arrived." She paused, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather told me what you did. That was a brave thing, standing up to Mr. Dawson like that." Connor shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what felt right." "That's what courage is, sweetheart, doing what's right even when it's scary." She rocked slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. "The Dawsons came by this morning while you were still sleeping." Connor's head snapped up. "They did? Are they mad at me?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "Quite the opposite. Martha brought a fresh pie and said they've been doing some thinking." She smoothed her apron thoughtfully. "Nathan's agreed to speak with the wildlife conservation officer about better ways to protect their orchard without harming the bears. They're even considering donating a portion of their land as a wildlife corridor." Connor's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected his actions to have such a profound effect on the stern couple. Before he could respond, the distant rumble of an unfamiliar engine drew their attention. A dark green truck with the Forest Service logo emblazoned on its side pulled into the driveway. "Now, who could that be?" Eleanor murmured, rising from her chair. A tall woman in a ranger's uniform stepped out of the truck, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat before approaching the porch. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she offered a friendly wave. "Good morning. I'm Ranger Savannah Reed from the Pine Hollow Wildlife Management Division. I'm looking for Connor Adams." Connor set down his lemonade, suddenly nervous. Was he in trouble for interfering with wildlife? "That's me," he said, standing up. Ranger Reed smiled warmly as she climbed the porch steps. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Connor. I've heard quite a story about you and a certain bear family." She extended her hand, which Connor shook cautiously. "Mr. Dawson called our office yesterday and explained what happened in his orchard. He was surprisingly forthcoming about his actions." Eleanor invited the ranger to sit and offered her refreshments, which she gratefully accepted. "Am I in trouble?" Connor asked, unable to contain his worry any longer. Ranger Reed laughed, a genuine sound that immediately put him at ease. "Not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. We've been tracking that mother bear and her cub for several months now as part of our conservation program." She pulled out a small tablet from her satchel and showed Connor a map of the surrounding forest with several markers. "They're part of a recovering black bear population in this region. The mother is one we call Autumn because of her unusually reddish coat." Connor leaned forward, fascinated. "That's her." She looked like copper in the sunlight. "Exactly. She's distinctive and quite special to our program." The ranger's expression grew serious. What Mr. Dawson did was not only cruel, but illegal under wildlife protection laws. However, instead of pressing charges, we've agreed to work with him and other orchard owners to develop better protection methods that don't harm the wildlife. Eleanor nodded approvingly. That sounds like a sensible approach. And, Ranger Reed continued, turning back to Connor with a smile, we wanted to thank you properly for your intervention. What you did was risky. I wouldn't recommend getting between a mother bear and her cub as standard practice, but your compassion may have prevented a tragedy for both the bears and the humans involved. She reached into her satchel again and produced an official-looking certificate and a small package. The Pine Hollow Wildlife Management Division would like to make you an honorary junior wildlife ranger. This comes with some educational materials about our local wildlife and an invitation to join us for a special tracking expedition next weekend. With your grandparents' permission, of course. Connor's face lit up as he accepted the gifts. Really? I could help track the bears? From a safe distance, Ranger Reed clarified with a wink. We use radio collars and tracking technology, not direct contact. But I think you'd find it fascinating to see how we monitor and protect our wildlife populations. As Connor examined his certificate with pride, a strange sound from the edge of the property caught their attention. It was a low, huffing noise, followed by the cracking of branches. All three turned toward the orchard, where the tree line met the cultivated land. Eleanor gasped softly, "Oh my!" There, partially obscured by the morning shadows, stood Autumn, her copper fur unmistakable even at a distance. She remained at the forest's edge, watchful and alert, but made no move to enter the orchard. Beside her, the small cub poked its head from behind her massive form, its curiosity evident even from afar. "Remarkable," Ranger Reed whispered, slowly reaching for her camera. "They rarely approach properties in daylight like this." Connor stood transfixed, a strange connection tugging at his heart as he locked eyes with the mother bear across the distance. It couldn't be coincidence that they had appeared just now, as if they somehow knew he was being recognized for helping them. "Don't make any sudden movements," the ranger advised, though neither Connor nor his grandmother seemed inclined to do so. "This is extremely unusual behavior." The mother bear huffed again, then nudged her cub gently. To everyone's astonishment, the cub bounded forward a few steps, dropped something from its mouth onto the ground, then quickly retreated to its mother's side. With one final look toward the porch, the mother bear turned and disappeared into the forest, her cub following close behind. A stunned silence fell over the porch until Ranger Reed finally spoke. "In all my years working with wildlife, I've never seen anything like that." She turned to Connor, her professional composure momentarily forgotten. "It's almost as if they came to thank you." Connor could hardly believe what had happened. "Can we see what the cub left behind?" Ranger Reed hesitated. "Let me check first. Stay here until I'm certain they've moved deeper into the forest." She descended the porch steps and cautiously approached the spot where the cub had dropped its offering. When she reached it, she knelt down, examined something on the ground, then stood with a bewildered expression. She returned to the porch holding what appeared to be a perfectly ripe, unbitten apple. "It's from the Dawsons' orchard," Ranger Reed said, her voice tinged with wonder as she handed the fruit to Connor. "See the distinctive striping. It's a heritage variety they specialize in." Connor cradled the apple in his palms, its weight somehow more significant than any gift he'd ever received. "But how did they know to bring it here, and why?" The ranger shook her head. "Animals are more intelligent and perceptive than we often give them credit for. Bears, in particular, have excellent memories for locations and people." She smiled at Connor's awestruck expression. "You made quite an impression, it seems." Eleanor wrapped an arm around her grandson's shoulders. "It appears you've made some unusual friends, Connor." As word of the extraordinary encounter spread through Pine Hollow over the next few days, the story transformed from a simple act of kindness to something approaching local legend. Connor found himself the reluctant center of attention, with neighbors stopping by to hear the tale firsthand, and the local newspaper requesting an interview. "I don't understand why everyone's making such a big deal about this," Connor confided to his grandfather as they repaired a section of fence the following afternoon. "I just did what anyone would do." Martin Adams paused in his hammering, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's just it, son. Not everyone would have done what you did. Most would have walked away or called someone else to handle it." He rested a weathered hand on Connor's shoulder. "It takes a special kind of courage to put yourself at risk for something that doesn't directly benefit you, especially for a wild animal that many consider a nuisance." Connor mulled this over as he handed his grandfather another nail. "Grandpa, do you think animals can really understand us? Like, know when we're trying to help them?" Martin considered the question seriously. "I've lived alongside wildlife my entire life, and I've seen things that science can't easily explain. Animals have instincts and intelligence that work differently from ours, but that doesn't make them less real." He pointed toward the distant mountains. "Those bears have lived in these forests for generations. They know things about this land that we can only guess at." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar green truck. Ranger Reed stepped out, accompanied by a lean, bearded man carrying sophisticated-looking equipment. "Good afternoon, Mr. Adams, Connor," she called as they approached. "Hope we're not intruding. This is Dr. Michael Hayes from the University Research Center. He specializes in bear behavior and cognition, and he was very interested in your experience." Dr. Hayes shook their hands enthusiastically. "Extraordinary account. Truly extraordinary. When Savannah told me about the apparent gift-giving behavior, I knew I had to investigate personally." His eyes gleamed with academic excitement behind wire-rimmed glasses. "There have been documented cases of corvids, ravens, and crows bringing gifts to humans who feed them, but nothing conclusive with large mammals like bears." Connor listened as the scientist explained his research on animal intelligence and interspecies communication. Dr. Hayes had dedicated his career to challenging conventional views on animal cognition, arguing that many species possessed forms of emotional intelligence and memory that human science was only beginning to understand. "Would you be willing to show me exactly where these encounters took place?" Dr. Hayes asked. "I'd like to set up some wildlife cameras if Mr. Dawson permits it. This could be groundbreaking for our understanding of ursine behavior." As they walked toward the Dawsons' property, Dr. Hayes peppered Connor with questions about the bear's behavior, particularly the mother bear's reactions. "You said she looked directly at you, and you felt a connection. Can you describe that feeling in more detail?" Connor struggled to put the experience into words. "It wasn't like talking, it was more like knowing. Like when you can tell what a friend is thinking just by looking at them." He kicked at a stone in the path. "Is that crazy?" "Not at all, Doctor," Hayes assured him. "Many indigenous cultures have traditions describing communication with animals that Western science has dismissed as mere folklore. But my research suggests there may be legitimate forms of interspecies understanding that operate beyond our conventional models of communication." When they reached the Dawsons' orchard, they found Nathan Dawson himself installing a new type of electric fencing with help from 2 Forest Service volunteers. "Ah, the bear whisperer returns," Mr. Dawson called out, But his tone held no mockery, only a gruff sort of respect. He set down his tools and approached the group. "Dr. Hayes, I presume? Ranger Reed mentioned you'd be stopping by." As the adults discussed the placement of wildlife cameras and the new non-lethal deterrent systems, Connor wandered to the apple tree where he'd found the cub hanging just days before. The memory still made his stomach clench with distress. He placed a hand on the rough bark, wondering if tree rings recorded not just seasons but moments like these, instances of cruelty and compassion that altered the flow of life around them. A flash of movement at the forest edge caught his eye. Connor squinted, his heart racing with sudden hope, but it was only a squirrel darting between trees. Yet something about the dense greenery called to him, an inexplicable pull he couldn't explain. "Connor!" Ranger Reed's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dr. Hayes has a proposal for you." The scientist approached, his enthusiasm barely contained. "Connor, with your grandparents' permission, I'd like you to assist with our research project. Your unique experience with these bears makes you an invaluable observer. We'd train you in proper wildlife observation techniques, of course, and all interactions would be supervised by Ranger Reed or myself." Connor could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You mean I could help study Autumn and her cub?" "Precisely. Sometimes animals form associations with specific humans, particularly after significant encounters. If these bears have indeed formed some kind of recognition bond with you, it could provide unprecedented research opportunities." The prospect was thrilling, but a nagging worry surfaced in Connor's mind. But wouldn't that be dangerous for them? I mean, if they get too comfortable around humans. Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. "An excellent concern, and precisely why we need thoughtful participants like you. Our goal isn't to domesticate or interfere with their natural behavior, but to better understand it so we can protect them and educate others." As they walked back to the farmhouse to discuss the details with his grandparents, Connor felt a strange mixture of excitement and responsibility settling over him. The encounter with the bears had started as a simple act of kindness, but it was becoming something much larger, a potential bridge of understanding between two worlds that normally remained apart. That night, as darkness settled over the countryside, Connor lay awake in bed, replaying the day's events in his mind. The window beside his bed was open, allowing the cool night breeze to carry the sounds and scents of the forest into his room. Crickets chirped their endless symphony, occasionally punctuated by the call of a distant owl. Connor's thoughts drifted to Autumn and her cub, wondering where they might be sleeping tonight, whether they were safe, whether they somehow sensed the changes their encounter had set in motion. It seemed impossible that their paths had crossed in such a profound way. Yet here he was, about to embark on a research project because of it. Just as sleep began to claim him, a soft sound outside his window snapped him back to alertness. It wasn't the familiar rustle of leaves or the scurrying of nocturnal creatures, but something deliberate, a gentle huffing breath that raised goosebumps along his arms. Connor lay perfectly still, his heart pounding. Could it be? Slowly, careful not to make sudden movements, he turned his head toward the open window. A dark silhouette blocked the starlight, a massive, furry head cautiously poking over the windowsill from the sloped roof below. In the dim light, Connor could just make out the gleam of intelligent eyes regarding him with unmistakable recognition. Autumn had found him. Connor's breath caught in his throat. The bear was close enough that he could smell her wild, musky scent. Earth and pine sap, and something uniquely bare. She made no move to enter the room, simply watching him with that same intense gaze that had connected them in the orchard. "Hello," Connor whispered, hardly daring to move. How had she found his window? How had she climbed onto the roof? The questions tumbled through his mind, but they seemed less important than the extraordinary fact of her presence. The bear huffed softly again, her breath visible in the cool night air. Behind her, a smaller shape clambered awkwardly onto the roof. The cub, following its mother as always. Connor watched, transfixed, as the cub poked its head beneath its mother's massive foreleg to peer curiously into the bedroom. For several heartbeats, they remained like that, boy and bears, regarding each other across a divide both physical and ancient. Then, just as quietly as she had appeared, Autumn withdrew from the window. Connor heard the slight scrape of claws on the roof as the bears retreated. He lay awake for a long time afterward, wondering if he had dreamed the encounter. But the lingering wild scent in his room and a single coarse, copper-colored fur on the windowsill confirmed that Autumn and her cub had indeed paid him a nocturnal visit. When dawn broke, Connor rushed downstairs to tell his grandparents about his midnight visitors, but the words died on his lips when he saw their grim expressions at the breakfast table. "What's wrong?" he asked, pausing in the doorway. Martin Adams folded the local newspaper he'd been reading. "Poachers," he said simply, turning the paper so Connor could see the headline. "Illegal bear hunting activity suspected in Pine Hollow Preserve." Connor's blood ran cold as he scanned the article. Forest Service officers had discovered hunting traps and bait stations within the protected wildlife area, specifically targeting bears. The poachers were likely after bear gallbladders and paws, which commanded high prices on the black market for use in traditional medicines and exotic cuisines. "They're hunting Autumn," Connor whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "We don't know that for certain," his grandmother said gently, but her eyes held worry. "There are several bears in the preserve." "I need to tell Ranger Reed," Connor exclaimed, suddenly remembering his nighttime visitors. "Autumn and her cub were here last night, right outside my window. If poachers are tracking them, they could be in danger." His grandparents exchanged concerned glances. "Connor," his grandfather said carefully, "are you sure about that? Bears don't typically approach houses like that, especially with cubs." "I'm positive, Grandpa. She was right there on the roof below my window. I could have touched her if I'd reached out." Connor pointed to the windowsill. "There's even a fur she left behind." Martin Adams's expression shifted from doubt to concern. "If you're right, this is unusual behavior, even for a bear that might recognize you. We should definitely contact Ranger Reed." Within an hour, Ranger Reed arrived with Dr. Hayes, both visibly troubled by the news about the poachers. They listened intently as Connor described his nighttime encounter with the bears. "It's as if she's seeking you out specifically," Dr. Hayes mused, examining the bear hair Connor had preserved in a small plastic bag. "This supports my theory about recognition bonds, but it also complicates our current situation enormously." Ranger Reed nodded grimly. "If these bears are approaching human habitations, even selectively it puts them at greater risk, not just from poachers but from potential conflict with humans who might perceive them as a threat." "But Autumn wasn't threatening anyone," Connor protested. "She was just checking on me, I think." "I believe you, Doctor," Hayes assured him, "but others might not understand the nuances of this relationship." He turned to Ranger Reed. "We need to accelerate our tracking program. If poachers are active in the area, every moment counts." As the adults discussed strategy, Connor slipped away to the back porch, his thoughts in turmoil. The idea of Autumn and her cub falling victim to poachers was unbearable. He stared out at the tree line, willing the copper-furred bear to appear again, safely out of danger's reach. A hand on his shoulder startled him from his thoughts. Dr. Hayes had followed him outside, his expression thoughtful. "Connor, I have an unorthodox proposal," he said quietly. "One I haven't shared with the others yet because it involves certain risks." Connor looked up at the scientist. "What kind of proposal?" "I believe you have established a genuine connection with these bears, particularly the mother. Such connections are extremely rare, but not unprecedented in wildlife research." Dr. Hayes glanced back toward the house to ensure they weren't overheard. "I want to use that connection to help protect them." "How?" "By letting the bears lead us to the poachers' traps before they can do harm." Dr. Hayes knelt to Connor's level. "Bears have an extraordinary sense of smell and natural wariness. Autumn likely already knows where the danger spots are. If she trusts you enough to approach your window, she might be willing to guide us, through her territory." Connor's eyes widened. "You mean go into the forest with her? Wouldn't that be dangerous?" "Under normal circumstances, absolutely. Getting close to a wild bear, especially one with a cub, would be extremely dangerous." Dr. Hayes's eyes gleamed with excitement. "But this is not a normal circumstance. This bear has already demonstrated unusual behavior toward you. With proper precautions and supervision, we might be able to leverage that connection to locate and dismantle the poachers' traps before they can be used." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What about Ranger Reed? Wouldn't she need to approve something like this?" Dr. Hayes hesitated. "Savannah is an excellent ranger, but she's bound by Forest Service protocols that don't account for exceptional circumstances like yours. I'm proposing we conduct this as an unofficial research expedition. Just you, me, and my assistant Jacob, who has extensive wilderness experience." Connor frowned. Something about the proposal didn't feel right. "Shouldn't we at least tell my grandparents?" "Of course we'll need their permission for you to join a research outing," Dr. Hayes said smoothly. "But the specific method, following the bear's lead rather than tracking her electronically, might be better explained after we've demonstrated its success." Before Connor could respond, Ranger Reed stepped onto the porch. "There you are. We've decided to set up a surveillance perimeter around the preserve boundaries." She gave Dr. Hayes a curious look. "Everything okay out here?" "Just discussing some wildlife behavioral theories with our young expert," Dr. Hayes replied with a casual smile. "Connor has remarkable intuition about these bears." Ranger Reed nodded, though her eyes remained questioning. "We could certainly use that intuition. The Forest Service is organizing a sweep of the preserve tomorrow to look for traps and signs of poacher activity. With your grandparents' permission, Connor, we'd welcome your help with the search team." "I'd like that," Connor said, avoiding Dr. Hayes's gaze. Something about the scientist's secret proposal had unsettled him, despite his eagerness to help protect Autumn and her cub. As Ranger Reed outlined the plans for the next day's search, Connor noticed Dr. Hayes typing rapidly on his phone, his expression intense. The scientist caught Connor watching him and quickly pocketed the device, offering a reassuring smile that somehow didn't reach his eyes. That evening, at dinner, Connor was unusually quiet, his thoughts consumed by worry for the bears and confusion about Dr. Hayes's strange proposal. His grandmother noticed his distraction. "You've hardly touched your pot roast, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right?" Connor pushed his food around his plate. "Just thinking about the bears. What if the poachers find them before we can find the traps?" His grandfather reached across the table to squeeze his shoulder. "The Forest Service knows what they're doing, Connor. And those bears have survived in these woods for generations. They're smarter than most people give them credit for." Connor nodded. but the knot of anxiety in his stomach remained. After helping clear the table, he excused himself to his room, claiming fatigue. In truth, he wanted to keep watch by his window, hoping Autumn might return and, somehow, knowing she was still safe. As night deepened outside his window, Connor struggled to stay awake. His eyelids grew heavy despite his determination, and he found himself drifting in and out of a fitful sleep filled with dreams of bears and traps and dark forests. A sharp tapping sound jolted him fully awake. For a disoriented moment he thought Autumn had returned to his window, but the sound came from elsewhere. The glass pane of the back door downstairs. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Connor crept down the stairs, careful not to wake his grandparents. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. He approached the back door cautiously and peered through the glass. Dr. Hayes stood on the porch, gesturing urgently for Connor to open the door. Behind him, another man waited, tall and lean with a serious expression, presumably his assistant Jacob. Connor hesitated, his earlier unease returning. Why would Dr. Hayes come in the middle of the night? He cracked the door open but kept the chain lock engaged. "Connor, thank goodness," Dr. Hayes whispered. "We've received information about poacher activity tonight. Several traps have been spotted near the eastern ridge, directly in the path your bears typically travel." "How do you know where they travel?" Connor asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Wildlife cameras," the man behind Dr. Hayes replied. "I'm Jacob Bennett, wildlife tracker. We've been monitoring movement patterns all day." Dr. Hayes nodded emphatically. "We don't have time to go through official channels. By the time we alert Ranger Reed and organize a response team, it could be too late. But if you can help us, we might be able to reach those traps tonight and disarm them before any animals are harmed." Connor's mind raced. If Autumn and her cub were truly in danger, every minute counted. But sneaking out in the middle of the night without telling his grandparents— "I should leave a note for my grandparents," he said, reaching for the notepad beside the phone. "No time," Dr. Hayes insisted, an edge entering his voice. "We'll be back before dawn. They'll never know you were gone." That statement sent a chill down Connor's spine. A legitimate researcher wouldn't ask a child to sneak away without telling his guardians. "I think we should call Ranger Reed," Connor said firmly, reaching for the phone. "She can help coordinate everything properly." Dr. Hayes's friendly demeanor vanished instantly. He pushed the door hard against the chain lock. "Listen, kid, we don't have time for this. Either come with us now, or those bears you care so much about might end up as rugs and medicine." The veiled threat confirmed Connor's suspicions. He backed away from the door. "You're not really trying to help the bears, are you?" Jacob stepped forward, his face now visible in the porch light. "Smart kid, too bad. Would have been easier if you'd just come along quietly." Connor's heart hammered in his chest as understanding dawned. "You're the poachers." "Conservationists, researchers, poachers, just labels, really," Dr. Hayes said with a cold smile. "The point is, we know about your special connection with that valuable copper, furred bear, and you're going to help us find her." Connor turned to run for the stairs to wake his grandparents, but Jacob was already forcing the door open, the chain lock snapping under his strength. In a panic, Connor grabbed the nearest object, a heavy cast-iron pan from the drying rack, and swung it wildly. The pan connected with Dr. Hayes's outstretched arm with a sickening crack. The man howled in pain, stumbling backward onto the porch. Jacob lunged forward, but Connor was already running for the stairs, screaming for his grandparents. "Grandpa! Grandma! Help!" The house erupted into chaos. Lights flicked on upstairs as Martin Adams came charging down the stairs, shotgun in hand. Eleanor was right behind him, already dialing the phone. Jacob took one look at the armed grandfather and fled into the night, dragging the injured Hayes with him. By the time the local sheriff arrived, the men were long gone, but their abandoned truck provided ample evidence of their true intentions. Tranquilizer guns, steel traps, and various butchering tools lay hidden under a tarp in the bed of the vehicle. "You did exactly the right thing, son," Sheriff Logan Carter told Connor as deputies combed the property for any sign of the fleeing poachers. "Those men have been on our radar for months, part of an international wildlife trafficking ring. We just never had enough evidence to move on them until now." Ranger Reed arrived shortly after, her face pale with shock when she learned the truth about Dr. Hayes, or whatever his real name was. "I checked his credentials myself," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "He had papers from the university, research publications, everything." "Sophisticated operation," the sheriff agreed, "but they made a critical mistake targeting this family." He nodded respectfully toward Connor. Not many kids would have recognized something was wrong and stood their ground like that. As the adults discussed the investigation, Connor slipped away to the back porch, his nerves still jangling from the encounter. The eastern horizon showed the first hint of pre-dawn light, turning the dark forest into a silhouette against the lightening sky. Movement at the forest edge caught his attention. Connor squinted, then caught his breath as a familiar copper shape emerged briefly from the trees. Autumn stood at the boundary between forest and farmland, her cub close beside her. Even at this distance, Connor could feel her watchful gaze fixed on the house, on the law enforcement vehicles with their flashing lights, on the evidence of danger averted. Had she somehow known? Had she come to his window that night as a warning, sensing the approach of the men who meant her harm? It seemed impossible, yet Connor couldn't shake the feeling that their connection went deeper than chance or circumstance. The bears lingered just long enough for Connor to raise his hand in a small wave. Then, as the sun's first rays broached the horizon, they melted back into the protective shadows of their forest home. The next week passed in a blur of police interviews, newspaper reporters, and congratulatory phone calls from relatives who had seen Connor's story on the local news. The sheriff's department had launched a manhunt for the fake doctor, Hayes and his accomplice, but so far, the poachers had evaded capture. Connor found himself simultaneously exhausted by the attention and worried about Autumn and her cub, who hadn't been spotted since the morning after the break-in attempt. What if the poachers find them before the police find the poachers? Connor asked anxiously as he helped his grandfather repair the back door, which still showed damage from that frightening night. Martin Adams paused in his work, setting down his hammer. "Those bears have survived because they're smart, Connor. They know how to avoid danger." He ruffled his grandson's hair affectionately. "And now, they have you watching out for them, too." "Not much good I can do from here," Connor muttered, handing his grandfather another nail. "Don't underestimate yourself, son. You've already done more for those bears than most folks would do in a lifetime." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ranger Reed's now familiar green truck. She wasn't alone. A slender woman with striking silver-streaked black hair and weathered bronze skin stepped out of the passenger side. "Good morning, Mr. Adams, Connor," Ranger Reed called as they approached. "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Lily Morgan from the Willow Creek Tribal Council. She's also a wildlife biologist specializing in predator-human relationships." Connor shook the woman's hand, noting her firm grip and direct gaze. There was something about her presence that commanded respect, a quiet authority that reminded him of his school principal, but with a warmth in her eyes that put him instantly at ease. "Connor Adams," Lily said, his name sounding somehow more significant in her melodious voice. I've heard quite a story about you and your bear friends." "They're not exactly my friends," Connor replied, embarrassed. "I just helped the cub when it was in trouble." Lily smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "In our traditions, such encounters are not considered accidents. When a wild creature chooses to connect with a human, it carries meaning." Connor's curiosity was piqued. "What kind of meaning?" "That depends on the specific circumstances and the animal involved," Lily explained. "Bears are considered wisdom keepers in many tribal stories. They walk between worlds, active in summer, dreaming in winter, bridging the seen and unseen realms of existence." Ranger Reed cleared her throat gently. "Lily has been helping us develop a new approach to protecting the bears from poachers while respecting their natural behaviors. We thought you might be interested in being involved, given your unique connection." Connor's heart leaped with hope. "Yes, absolutely. How can I help?" The adults exchanged glances, and Martin nodded his approval. "Let's discuss this inside. Eleanor just made a fresh batch of lemonade." Around the kitchen table, Lily spread out a detailed topographical map of the forest preserve. Using a red marker, she circled several areas. "These are the locations where we've found evidence of poaching activity in the past month. Snare placements, bait stations, trail cameras that don't belong to our conservation teams." Her finger traced a pattern across the map. "They're targeting crossing points where bears typically travel between feeding grounds." Ranger Reed pointed to a different section marked in blue. "And these are the locations where our legitimate wildlife cameras have captured images of Autumn and her cub most frequently." Connor leaned forward, studying the map intently. "They seem to stay mostly in this valley area." "Good observation." Lily nodded approvingly. "That valley contains several wild berry patches and a stream with good fishing. The dense undergrowth provides cover, and the ridge offers escape routes if needed." "The problem," Ranger Reed continued, "is that we don't have enough personnel to monitor the entire preserve continuously. The poachers know this and have been staying one step ahead of our patrols." Lily tapped the map thoughtfully. "We need to understand the bears' movements better than the poachers do, and we need to establish a presence that makes the poachers too uncomfortable to operate." Connor looked up. "So, how do I fit in?" "You have established what we might call a trust relationship with Autumn," Lily explained. "It's rare, but not unprecedented. Throughout history, there are accounts of specific wild animals forming bonds with individual humans." Martin Adams frowned slightly. "You're not suggesting Connor should be out in the woods looking for these bears, are you? After what happened with those poachers?" "Not alone, certainly," Ranger Reed assured him quickly. "But we're establishing a volunteer citizen monitoring program. Pairs of trained observers who will regularly document wildlife activity and report any suspicious human activity. The presence of legitimate forest users often deters poachers who prefer to operate unobserved. With your permission," Lily added, "we'd like Connor to join this program, paired with an experienced adult volunteer. His intuition regarding these particular bears could be valuable." Connor held his breath, looking at his grandfather with pleading eyes. After what seemed like an eternity, Martin sighed. Who would be working with him? "I would," Lily said simply. "In addition to my work with the Tribal Council and my biology background, I've been a certified wilderness guide for 20 years. The discussion continued for another hour, hammering out details, safety protocols, and schedules. By the time Lily and Ranger Reed departed, it was settled. Connor would join the forest monitoring program 3 afternoons a week, always under Lily's supervision and always returning before dark. His grandmother had concerns naturally, but Connor could barely contain his excitement. Not only would he be helping to protect Autumn and her cub, but he'd be learning from Lily, whose knowledge of the forest and its inhabitants seemed almost magical to him. The following Tuesday marked Connor's first official monitoring session. After school, Ranger Reed picked him up and drove him to the preserve headquarters, a modest cabin at the forest's edge where volunteers checked in and received their assignments. Lily was waiting, dressed in muted earth tones with a well-worn backpack at her feet. "Ready for your first day as a junior forest guardian?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Connor nodded eagerly, accepting the small notebook and official volunteer badge Ranger Reed handed him. "Remember the rules," the ranger cautioned. "Stay with Lily at all times. Document what you observe, but don't interfere with wildlife, and return to base by 5 o'clock sharp." "I remember," Connor promised, clipping the badge to his jacket with a surge of pride. Lily shouldered her pack. "We'll take the Eastern Ridge Trail today. It offers good vantage points of the valley without being too strenuous." As they set off into the forest, Connor bombarded Lily with questions about her work, the bears, and her tribal knowledge. She answered patiently, occasionally stopping to point out plant species or animal signs he might have overlooked. "Learning to read the forest is like learning a new language," she explained, kneeling to examine a patch of disturbed leaves. "Every mark tells a story if you know how to interpret it." Connor watched as she gently brushed away debris to reveal a distinctive 5-toed print pressed into the soft earth. "Bear?" Lily nodded. "Good size, too, not Autumn. The stride length suggests a male. Probably the one we call Old Thunder because of his deep vocalizations." They continued along the ridge, stopping periodically to document wildlife signs and check the legitimate trail cameras maintained by the preserve staff. Connor kept scanning the forest below, hoping for a glimpse of copper fir, but the valley remained still except for the occasional flutter of birds or scurrying of small mammals. Near a small clearing about an hour into their hike, Lily suddenly raised her hand in a signal to stop. Her posture changed, becoming alert and focused as she scanned their surroundings. "What is it?" Connor whispered, instinctively matching her quiet tone. Lily didn't answer immediately, her nostrils flaring slightly as she tested the air. "Someone's been here recently, someone who doesn't belong." Connor looked around nervously, remembering the false Dr. Hayes and his accomplice. The poachers? Perhaps. Lily moved forward cautiously, examining the ground and surrounding vegetation with expert eyes. She stopped at the base of a large oak tree and pointed to nearly invisible marks on the bark. "Climbing spurs. Someone climbed this tree recently, within the last day or two." Connor followed her gaze upward and noticed something metallic glinting among the branches. "There's something up there." Lily nodded grimly. "Trail camera, but not one of ours. The poachers are monitoring animal movements." She pulled out her radio. "I need to report this to Ranger Reed. These cameras can help us track the poachers' surveillance pattern." As Lily made her report, Connor continued to scan the surrounding forest. Something felt different about this part of the woods, a heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched that raised the hair on the back of his neck. He took a few steps away from Lily, drawn to a dense thicket of undergrowth at the clearing's edge. A flash of movement caught his eye. Something dark and swift slipping between the trees about 30 yards away. Connor froze, his heart racing. Had he just glimpsed one of the poachers? Or was it a deer or some other forest animal? "Lily," he called softly. But she was still engaged in her radio conversation, her back to him. The undergrowth rustled again, closer this time. Connor took an involuntary step backward, his foot catching on an exposed root. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, but the noise seemed thunderous in the quiet forest. The rustling stopped abruptly. Then, to Connor's astonishment, a familiar copper-colored head emerged cautiously from behind a fallen log. Autumn's dark eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. Connor's breath caught in his throat. He remained perfectly still, afraid any movement might frighten her away. The bear studied him intently, her nose working to capture his scent. After what seemed like an eternity, she huffed softly and took a tentative step into the open. Her cub followed, noticeably larger than when Connor had first encountered him in the orchard. The young bear seemed less fearful than its mother, its curiosity evident as it sniffed the air in Connor's direction. "Lily," Connor whispered, not daring to turn his head. "They're here." He heard Lily's sharp intake of breath as she ended her radio call and slowly moved to stand beside him. "Extraordinary," she murmured. "She's seeking you out." Autumn took another step forward, then stopped, her head swinging towards something beyond Connor's view. In an instant, her demeanor changed completely. Her fur bristled, and she rose slightly on her hind legs, issuing a warning grunt to her cub, who immediately scrambled behind her. "Something's wrong," Lily whispered, her hand moving slowly to the bear spray on her belt. "She senses danger." Before Connor could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the forest, a twig snapping under someone's boot. Autumn dropped to all fours, positioning herself between the perceived threat and her cub. "Stay behind me," Lily ordered, pushing Connor partially behind her own body as she scanned the forest edge intently. A man's voice called out from the trees, slick with false friendliness. "Well, what do we have here? Our young bear whisperer and a local guide, I presume?" Connor's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice. It was Jacob, the fake Dr. Hayes's accomplice. Lily's stance changed subtly, her body coiled with tension. "Forest Service Volunteer Patrol," she called back, her voice steady and authoritative. "Identify yourself." A chuckle answered her, and Jacob stepped into view about 20 yards away. He looked different from the night he'd tried to break into Connor's grandparents' house. His hair was dyed dark, and he wore the standard-issue jacket of a preserve maintenance worker. But Connor would never forget those cold eyes. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Trail maintenance." He patted the tool belt at his waist, which Connor noticed contained items that looked nothing like trail maintenance equipment. Autumn growled, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through the clearing. Her eyes never left Jacob, and her body remained positioned to protect her cub. "You're trespassing in a restricted research area," Lily stated firmly, her hand still on the bear spray. "Please return to the main trail immediately." Jacob's friendly facade slipped, revealing a calculating expression. "Interesting company you're keeping," he remarked, nodding toward Autumn. "That bear seems unusually comfortable around humans, almost tame." His hand moved casually toward his jacket pocket. "She's wild, and we're keeping our distance," Lily replied, her voice taking on an edge of warning. "I suggest you do the same." Jacob's eyes narrowed. That copper fur would fetch a premium price. Unusual coloration, especially with documentation of its special abilities with humans. He pulled out what looked like a small tranquilizer gun from his pocket. Everything happened at once. Lily shouted a warning and reached for her radio. Autumn roared and charged forward several steps, not attacking but creating a threatening display. Connor, acting on pure instinct, picked up a fallen branch and swung it through the air, creating a loud whooshing sound that echoed through the clearing. The combination of threats momentarily startled Jacob, causing him to fumble the tranquilizer gun. In that moment of distraction, Autumn seized her opportunity. Instead of attacking Jacob directly, she circled around, using her massive body to herd her cub toward a different escape route, directly past Connor and Lily. As the bears moved past them, barely 10 feet away, Connor felt the rush of air from Autumn's passage, caught the wild scent of her fur. The cub, following close behind its mother, paused briefly to look directly at Connor, its expressive eyes seeming to convey some unspoken message before it hurried after Autumn into the dense forest. Jacob cursed, recovering his composure and raising the tranquilizer gun, but Lily already had her bear spray pointed at him. "Lower your weapon," she commanded, her voice like steel. "Forest Service officers are already on their way." A wry smile twisted Jacob's features. Always one step behind, aren't they? He glanced in the direction the bears had fled, calculation evident in his eyes. "This isn't over, kid," he called to Connor. "That bear's made you famous, but she's going to make me rich." With surprising agility, Jacob turned and sprinted into the forest, taking a different path than the bears had chosen. Lily immediately radioed their location in the direction of Jacob's flight, but they both knew the dense undergrowth gave him ample opportunity to disappear. "Are you all right?" Lily asked Connor, her hand firm on his shoulder. Connor nodded, his heart still racing. "Do you think he'll find them?" "Not today," Lily assured him, though her eyes remained troubled. "Autumn knows these forests better than any human could. She'll keep her cubs safe." Within 20 minutes, Ranger Reed and 2 other Forest Service officers arrived, but despite a thorough search of the surrounding area, Jacob had vanished. The officers documented the illegal trail camera and the evidence of poaching activity, adding it to their growing case file. "He was wearing one of our maintenance staff jackets," Ranger Reed said grimly, as they walked back to the preserve headquarters. "We'll need to implement new security protocols and identification checks for all personnel." Connor recounted his experience to his grandparents that evening, his words tumbling over each other in his eagerness to describe seeing Autumn and her cub again. His grandfather listened gravely, while his grandmother's face grew increasingly pale. "I think that's quite enough forest adventures," Eleanor Adams declared when Connor finished his story. "Next time, it could be worse than a tranquilizer gun." "But Grandma, we can't just abandon Autumn and her cub now," Connor protested. "The poachers know about them, and they're not giving up. That's for the authorities to handle," she insisted, her worry evident in the tight lines around her mouth. "You're just a boy, Connor, a brave boy, but still a child." Connor looked to his grandfather for support, but Martin's expression was troubled. "Your grandmother has a point, son. These poachers are dangerous criminals. They've already tried to use you once to get to the bears." Connor's shoulders slumped in defeat. How could he explain the connection he felt to Autumn? It wasn't just about saving a bear cub anymore. It was about honoring a trust that had formed between them, a strange bond that defied explanation. Later that night, as Connor lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a soft tapping at his window startled him fully awake. His first thought was of Jacob, returned to make good on his threat. He approached the window cautiously, then gasped at what he saw. Perched precariously on the sloped roof outside his window was the bear cub, now alone without its mother. It balanced on its hind legs, one paw pressed against the glass, dark eyes peering intently into Connor's room. For a moment, Connor stood frozen in disbelief. How had the cub found his house? Where was Autumn? The cub tapped the glass again, more insistently this time, a soft whine escaping its throat. Something was wrong. Connor could feel it with a certainty that transcended rational thought. Carefully, he cracked the window open. "What is it? Where's your mom?" The cub backed away slightly as the window opened, but didn't flee. Instead, it made a series of urgent sounds. Not quite growls, but distressed vocalizations that Connor somehow understood contained a message. "Follow me." "I can't," Connor whispered, though everything inside him urged otherwise. "It's the middle of the night. My grandparents would be worried sick." The cub whined again, more desperately this time, then turned and climbed awkwardly down to the edge of the roof, looking back at Connor expectantly. Connor's mind raced. What if Autumn was injured? What if the poachers had set traps that caught her? Could he really ignore this plea for help? Making a decision that he knew might be the most foolish of his young life, Connor quickly dressed in warm clothes and sturdy shoes. He scribbled a note explaining where he had gone and why, leaving it prominently on his pillow where his grandparents would find it if they checked his room. Then, heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination, he carefully climbed out the window and followed the bear cub into the night. The cub led him across the moonlit fields, separating his grandparents' property from the forest edge. Despite its youth, it moved with surprising speed and purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure Connor was still following. They entered the forest at a point familiar to Connor from his monitoring sessions with Lily, but soon veered onto game trails too narrow and winding for human use. The darkness beneath the forest canopy was nearly complete, with only occasional shafts of moonlight penetrating to guide their way. Connor stumbled frequently, his human night vision pitiful compared to the cub's natural abilities. Still, he pressed on, driven by the growing certainty that Autumn was in serious trouble. After what seemed like hours, but was probably less than 40 minutes, the cub slowed its pace, moving more cautiously. It led Connor to the edge of a small ravine, where a stream gurgled softly over moss-covered rocks. The cub whined softly, peering down the steep embankment. Connor followed its gaze and gasped. There, at the bottom of the ravine, lay Autumn's distinctive copper form, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight that broke through the trees. She was motionless, her massive body sprawled awkwardly beside the stream. "Autumn!" Connor called softly, his heart in his throat. The bear's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, and a low moan escaped her. She was alive, but clearly injured. Connor scrambled down the embankment, slipping on loose stones and grabbing at saplings to slow his descent. When he reached the bottom, he approached cautiously, aware that even an injured bear could be dangerous if she felt threatened. "It's me," he said softly. "I'm here to help." Autumn's dark eyes found him in the dim light, recognition softening her gaze. She attempted to rise but collapsed back with a pained growl. The cub hurried to its mother's side, nuzzling her face with evident distress. In the faint moonlight, Connor could see what had happened. A cruel metal trap was clamped around Autumn's front paw, its teeth digging deep into her flesh. A chain secured the trap to a nearby tree, preventing her escape. Blood matted her fur around the wound, suggesting she had struggled for some time before exhaustion overcame her. "Oh no," Connor whispered, horror and anger rising in his throat. "Those monsters!" He knelt beside Autumn's injured paw, examining the trap cautiously. It was a spring-loaded design with powerful jaws designed to snap shut when triggered. His grandfather had shown him similar traps before, explaining they were cruel and now illegal in most places precisely because they caused such suffering. Autumn watched him warily, but made no move to prevent his examination. The cub paced anxiously between them, whimpering softly. "I need to get this off you," Connor told Autumn, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough." The trap's springs required significant force to compress, allowing the jaws to be opened and the trapped limb released. Connor positioned his hands on the spring mechanism and pushed with all his strength, but the metal barely budged. He tried again, muscles straining, but achieved the same disappointing result. Desperation welled within him. Autumn's breathing was becoming more labored, and the wound continued to bleed. If he couldn't free her soon, she might not survive until morning. "I need help," Connor admitted, reaching for his pocket before remembering with a sinking heart that he'd left his phone in his room. No way to call for assistance, no tools to work with, and a severely injured bear counting on him. The cub nudged his arm insistently, a low huffing sound escaping its throat. When Connor looked up, he found the young bear watching him with an intelligence that seemed beyond its years. It nudged him again, then moved to the nearby stream, pawing at something half submerged in the water. Connor followed, puzzled, and discovered a fallen branch lodged among the rocks. It was sturdy and about 3 feet long. Not exactly a tool, but perhaps a memory surfaced from a wilderness survival book his grandfather had given him. Leverage. With a proper fulcrum, even a child could move a weight many times heavier than themselves. "That's it," Connor exclaimed, grabbing the branch. He returned to Autumn's side and carefully positioned the branch through the spring mechanism of the trap. Using a nearby rock as a fulcrum, he pushed down on the longer end of the branch with his entire body weight. Slowly, agonizingly, the spring began to compress. The trap's jaws loosened slightly, but not enough to free Autumn's paw. Connor pushed harder, his arms trembling with effort, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Just a little more," he gasped, throwing all his weight onto the branch. With a sudden give, the spring compressed fully, and the trap's jaws opened wide enough for Autumn to withdraw her injured paw. She did so with a pained growl, immediately beginning to lick the wounded area once it was free. Connor carefully released the pressure, allowing the trap to snap shut on empty air. He kicked it away in disgust, wishing he could destroy it completely. "You're free," he told Autumn, relief washing over him. "Can you stand?" The massive bear struggled to her feet, favoring her injured paw heavily. She swayed slightly but remained upright, her strength impressive despite her ordeal. The cub hurried to her side, pressing against her supportively. Connor knew he should head home immediately. His grandparents might already have discovered his absence, and his note would do little to alleviate their worry. But Autumn's wound needed attention. The trap's teeth had cut deep, and infection was a serious risk. "Let me clean that," he said, moving toward the stream. He tore a strip from the bottom of his t-shirt and soaked it in the cold water. Approaching Autumn cautiously, he held out the damp cloth. "This might hurt a bit." To his amazement, Autumn extended her injured paw toward him, seeming to understand his intentions. With gentle movements, Connor cleaned away the blood and dirt from the wound. The cuts were deep but had mostly stopped bleeding. Still, without proper treatment, infection remained a serious concern. As Connor worked, a strange calm settled over the ravine. The night creatures fell silent, and even the stream seemed to quiet its burbling. In that moment of stillness, Connor felt a profound connection to the injured bear before him. A bond of trust and understanding that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild animal. When he finished cleaning the wound as best he could, Connor sat back on his heels, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and the enormity of what had just occurred. "I have to go home now," he told Autumn softly. "My grandparents will be worried, but I'll come back with help. Someone who can treat your paw properly." Autumn regarded him silently, her intelligent eyes holding his gaze. Then, slowly, deliberately, she dipped her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a nod of understanding. Connor rose unsteadily to his feet, his muscles aching from the effort of springing the trap. The cub circled him once, brushing against his legs in an almost cat-like gesture of gratitude, before returning to its mother's side. "Stay hidden," Connor advised, though he wondered if the bears already knew to avoid the trails and open areas where poachers might lurk. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Finding his way home proved more challenging than following the cub had been. Connor backtracked as best he could, recognizing landmarks here and there from his monitoring sessions with Lily. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when he finally emerged from the forest edge and spotted his grandparents' farmhouse in the distance. As he'd feared, lights blazed from every window despite the early hour. A Forest Service truck and his grandfather's pickup were parked in the driveway, suggesting a search party was already being organized. Connor's legs felt like lead as he trudged across the field toward the house. He had barely reached the back porch when the door flew open, and his grandmother rushed out, her face lined with fear and relief. "Connor! Oh, thank God!" She enveloped him in a fierce hug, her body trembling. "Martin, he's here! He's safe!" His grandfather appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from worry to profound relief, then to unmistakable anger. "Where have you been, boy? Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" Connor opened his mouth to explain, but the events of the night suddenly caught up with him. His legs buckled, and he would have fallen if his grandmother hadn't been holding him so tightly. "He's exhausted," she said, her nurse's training taking over. "Let's get him inside." The next hours passed in a blur as Connor was examined, given food and water, and questioned repeatedly about his nighttime adventure. Ranger Reed arrived, followed shortly by Lily, both listening intently as Connor described finding Autumn caught in the poacher's trap and his successful efforts to free her. "But she's hurt badly," Connor insisted, fighting against the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "The trap cut deep into her paw. She needs help." Lily and Ranger Reed exchanged concerned glances. "A wounded bear is extremely dangerous," Ranger Reed cautioned, "even one that seems to trust you. And approaching with medical intervention could do more harm than good," Lily added. "Wild animals have remarkable healing abilities when left to their own devices." "But what if it gets infected?" Connor protested. "What if the poachers find her while she's too weak to escape?" His grandfather placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than most grown men would attempt, Connor. Now you need to trust the professionals to handle things from here." The adults continued discussing options while Connor fought to keep his eyes open. The last thing he remembered before sleep claimed him was Lily's thoughtful expression as she studied the crude map he'd drawn showing Autumn's location. When Connor awoke, late afternoon sunlight was streaming through his bedroom window. For a disoriented moment, he wondered if the entire bear rescue had been a dream. Then he noticed the dirt under his fingernails and the torn hem of his t-shirt, tangible evidence of his nighttime adventure. He found his grandparents and Lily in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones that immediately ceased when he entered. "How are you feeling?" his grandmother asked, rising to feel his forehead as if checking for fever. "I'm fine," Connor assured her, though his muscles ached from the exertion of the previous night. "Did anyone check on Autumn?" The adults exchanged glances that Connor couldn't quite interpret. "Lily and Ranger Reed located the ravine using your map," his grandfather explained. "They found the trap, just as you described. And Autumn? Was she still there? Is she okay?" Lily offered a reassuring smile. "She had moved on by the time we arrived, which is actually a good sign. It means she was strong enough to travel." "We found blood tracks leading away from the site," Ranger Reed added, entering from the living room where she'd apparently been waiting. "But they disappeared into a rocky area where tracking becomes nearly impossible." Connor's heart sank. "So you don't know if she's okay?" We've set up wildlife cameras along the likely routes she might take, Ranger Reed assured him. If she passes one of them, we'll know. A thought struck Connor. What about the cub? It found me once. It might try again if Autumn gets worse. His grandmother's expression tightened with renewed worry. Connor Adams, if you think for one moment that you're going out in the middle of the night again. I'm not suggesting that, Connor hurried to clarify. But maybe we could set up a camera facing my window, just in case. The idea was met with cautious approval, and by evening, a small wildlife camera had been discreetly mounted with a view of the roof outside Connor's bedroom window. The following days fell into an uneasy routine. Connor returned to his regular monitoring sessions with Lily, though now they were accompanied by an armed Forest Service officer as an additional precaution against the poachers who remained at large. Every night, Connor checked the footage from the window camera, hoping for some sign of the cub, but the recordings showed nothing unusual. As days stretched into a week with no bear sightings, he began to fear the worst. Had Autumn's wound become infected? Had the poachers found her in her weakened state? On the 8th day after the trap incident, Connor's monitoring session with Lily took them to a new area of the preserve, a remote section with several small caves formed by ancient geological activity. The Forest Service had received reports of suspicious activity in the vicinity, and they were conducting a thorough sweep of the area. As they hiked along a narrow trail bordered by towering pines, Lily suddenly raised her hand, signaling for silence. Connor froze, every sense alert for danger. Their accompanying officer, Deputy Bennett, moved his hand to his sidearm, scanning the surrounding forest. "Listen," Lily whispered. Connor strained his ears. At first, he heard only the regular sounds of the forest. Wind through pine needles, distant bird calls, the occasional scurrying of small creatures in the underbrush. Then he caught it. A faint rhythmic sound, almost like snoring. Lily's eyes widened in recognition. Motioning for them to follow, she led them off the trail and through a dense thicket of mountain laurel. They emerged at the mouth of a small cave, partially obscured by fallen logs and thick vegetation. The snoring sound was louder now, emanating from the shadows within the cave. Connor's heart leaped with sudden hope. "Is it—" Lily nodded, a smile spreading across her face. Bears often seek caves for recovery when they're injured. It provides protection and consistent temperature. Deputy Bennett looked uneasy. "We should back away. A wounded bear in a confined space is extremely dangerous." But Connor had already spotted the telltale copper fur gleaming in a shaft of sunlight that penetrated the cave's entrance. Without conscious thought, he took a step forward, drawn by the powerful certainty that Autumn would not harm him. "Connor, wait," Lily cautioned, but her voice held more curiosity than alarm. From the cave's dark interior, a familiar huffing sound answered Connor's approach. The snoring stopped, and two shapes moved in the shadows, one large, one small. Autumn's massive head appeared at the cave entrance, her dark eyes instantly finding Connor's. "She's alive," Connor whispered, relief washing through him like a physical force. Deputy Bennett tensed, his hand still on his weapon, but Lily placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she murmured. "Watch." To everyone's astonishment, Autumn emerged fully from the cave, moving with only a slight limp. Her injured paw appeared to be healing well. The wound was clearly visible but clean, with no signs of infection. Behind her, the cub bounded out, seeming energetic and healthy. "Remarkable," Lily breathed. "She's found a safe haven and allowed the natural healing process to work." Connor took another cautious step forward, then stopped, respecting the distance between wild and human. "Hi, Autumn," he said softly. "I'm glad you're okay." As if in response to his voice, Autumn approached, her movements deliberate but unthreatening. Deputy Bennett sucked in a sharp breath but held his position as Lily had instructed. To everyone's amazement, Autumn stopped just a few feet from Connor. Her intelligent eyes studied him intently, and then she did something that left all three humans speechless. She extended her injured paw toward Connor, almost as if inviting his inspection. "She's showing me her wound," Connor whispered in awe. Lily nodded, her expression a mixture of wonder and scientific curiosity. "She associates you with helping her. This is unprecedented behavior." Connor knelt slowly, maintaining eye contact with the massive bear. With gentle movements, he examined the paw from a respectful distance. The deep cuts were healing cleanly, the fur beginning to grow back around the wounds. "You're doing great, Autumn," Connor said softly. "You're going to be fine." The bear huffed softly, withdrawing her paw. The cub, emboldened by its mother's trust, approached Connor with curious sniffs. It had grown noticeably in the weeks since their first encounter, its body losing some of the gangly awkwardness of early youth. "This connection," Lily murmured, carefully documenting the interaction with her camera. "It's extraordinary." Deputy Bennett had relaxed his stance somewhat, though his expression remained cautious. "I've never seen anything like this in 15 years of forest service." After a few more moments of this remarkable interaction, Autumn made a soft, chuffing sound to her cub. The young bear immediately returned to its mother's side, and with one last meaningful look at Connor, they retreated into the cave. "We should go," Lily suggested. "They've found a safe haven here, and the less human presence the better." As they hiked back to the preserve headquarters, Connor felt a profound sense of peace. Autumn was healing. She was safe, at least for now, in a hideaway that even the poachers would struggle to find. The following weeks brought significant developments. Based on evidence gathered from the illegal traps and trail cameras, combined with Connor's descriptions, the authorities finally apprehended Jacob and the fake Dr. Hayes at a remote cabin just outside the county line. Their arrest led to the discovery of an international wildlife trafficking network, resulting in multiple additional arrests across 3 states. The story of Connor and the bears became something of a regional sensation, drawing attention from wildlife conservation groups and even a documentary filmmaker interested in exploring the unique bond between the boy and the wild animals. Connor found himself unexpectedly famous, though his grandparents carefully managed the attention to protect their grandson's privacy. By the time summer began drawing to a close, Connor's scheduled return to his parents in the city loomed on the horizon. The thought of leaving Autumn and her cub filled him with a peculiar sadness he couldn't quite articulate. "Will they be okay when I'm gone?" he asked Lily during their final monitoring session together. The wildlife biologist smiled gently. "Bears are incredibly resilient, Connor. And thanks to you, the preserve has implemented new security measures and expanded the protected habitat areas. Autumn and her cub have a much better chance now. I wish I could explain to her that I'm leaving, but I'll be back next summer," Connor said wistfully, scanning the forest edge for any sign of copper fur. "I think somehow she'll understand," Lily replied. "The connection you share goes beyond words." On Connor's last night at the farmhouse, he left his bedroom window open, more out of symbolic gesture than any real expectation. He had checked the wildlife camera footage daily, but there had been no sign of the bears near the house since that fateful night weeks ago. As he packed the last of his belongings, a familiar sound drew him to the window, a soft huffing breath and the subtle scrape of claws on the roof tiles. Connor's heart leaped as he rushed to the window. There, illuminated by moonlight, stood Autumn and her cub. The mother bear's coat gleamed like burnished copper, her injured paw now healed enough that she bore weight on it without obvious discomfort. The cub had grown remarkably, nearly half its mother's size now, its eyes bright with the same intelligence Connor had come to recognize in Autumn's gaze. "You came to say goodbye," Connor whispered, his throat tight with emotion. Autumn regarded him silently, her deep eyes reflecting the moonlight. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached toward the windowsill and deposited something from her mouth. A perfect pine cone, its scales open to reveal the seeds within. Connor carefully took the offering, understanding instinctively that it represented something profound: life, renewal, continuation. A tear slipped down his cheek as he smiled at the bears. "I'll be back next summer, I promise." The cub made a soft sound, almost like a purr, before Autumn gently nudged it away from the window. With one last meaningful look at Connor, the mother bear turned and led her cub across the roof, down the old oak tree that grew beside the house, and across the moonlit field toward the waiting forest. Connor watched until they disappeared among the trees, the pine cone clutched tightly in his hand. He knew that Autumn and her cub would continue their wild lives in the forest, hunting, playing, growing, surviving as bears had for thousands of years, and he knew with equal certainty that the bond they shared would endure, transcending the boundaries between human and wild, connecting them in ways that defied conventional understanding. In the orchard where their story began, the trees would continue to bear fruit, season after season. The Dawsons would continue to tend their land, now with a newfound respect for the wilderness that bordered their carefully cultivated rows. And deep in the forest preserve, protected by new laws and vigilant guardians inspired by one boy's courage, a copper-furred bear and her growing cub would roam free, their story becoming part of the forest's enduring legacy. Connor placed the pine cone carefully in his backpack, alongside his junior ranger badge and the photographs documenting his summer adventure. Tomorrow, he would return to the city, to concrete and classrooms and the rhythm of urban life. But part of his heart would remain here, in this place where he had learned that sometimes the most shocking thing a human